Project Coldcase. He's going to tell you his story. He's got with him today Frida, I'm sorry, I forgot your last name.
Perez.
Frida Perez, who also works with Project Coldcase. And these ladies are from the Department of Criminal Justice. They are students in the Department of Criminal Justice Department, and they're interns for Project Coldcase. So I'm going to turn this over to Ryan and let him tell you what Project Coldcase is all about.
Thank you, Tricia. I'm Ryan Backman, founder and executive director of Project Coldcase. Frida Perez is our victim advocate. Clint in the back there is our marketing coordinator. And I saw somebody come in with an Auburn shirt, and he's an Auburn grad, so War Eagle, you guys will. Yeah. And then this is Brielle and Maddie. They both attend UNF here and are working with Project Coldcase this semester with their criminal justice internship. Actually, you're just volunteering. Yeah. Brielle's just volunteering. But Maddie and we have another intern also from the criminal justice department. So they're just here to observe and help us out. We've been doing this project with this class for a number of semesters now, and it's really turned into something powerful and special, and we want to keep that going. So we come out once a semester, we talk about Project Coldcase, and we talk about what your role is going to be in assisting us help families of unsolved murders. So this whole organization started because 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago now, I got a phone call from a blocked number, and they left a voicemail. And when I listened to the voicemail, it said, "This is Detective so-and-so from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. There's been an emergency. We need you to call us back right away." So I did. I called the number. The detective on the other end of the phone said, "We're on our way to your house." I said, "Is everything okay?" And they said, "No, but we'll tell you what's going on when we get there." So I immediately turned to my wife and say, "Something bad has happened. The police are on their way." In my world, in my mind, that was just maybe a car accident with a family member with some broken ribs or something like that. I walked out the door, got to the driveway about the time an unmarked car pulled up and two plainclothes detectives got out. They said, "We hate to tell you this, but your father was murdered earlier today." So that was October 10th, 2009. You can't prepare yourself for something like that. You can't read about it. You just have to live it, and you have to experience it and kind of deal with the grief as it comes. About 3 months later, I left my career in architecture and went to work as a victim advocate, helping other families that had lost loved ones to homicide, some of them solved, some of them still unsolved. I did that right before the 1-year anniversary of my dad's murders when I took that job. About 6 months later, detectives called me and asked for a meeting. So automatically I assumed they had information on who had done this. They had a suspect, a person of interest. That was not the case. They sat me down and they said, "We hate to tell you this now, but we've run out of leads. We have nothing left to investigate. We have no suspects. None of the physical evidence came back that we tested, and we're suspending your dad's case. It's now a cold case." So that was about a year and a half, like I say, after my dad's murder. I had been kind of preparing myself for the fact that, gosh, what if they don't catch this person? How am I going to live, not knowing what happened? And while I was preparing myself for that, I was never preparing for the day police would stop looking. And that really hit me hard. So there comes a point in an investigation where they do run out of leads, where the evidence, the technology hasn't caught up, where they can, get any new investigative leads from the evidence, physical evidence. In my dad's case, there was not a lot of physical evidence. He was working in a newly renovated office building off JTB in 95, not far from here. He was by himself. Detectives believe he was vacuuming up drywall dust when someone was just walking through the parking lot and saw an opportunity. They walked in, shot my dad, took his wallet, and left. My dad lived long enough to call 911 and spent the last 7 minutes of his life on the phone with a 911 operator trying to describe the person that had just shot him. I've continued as a victim advocate for a few years after finding out about that the case was suspended and cold. As I worked in that role, I met more and more families that had unsolved cases. And I kind of felt like I was the only one dealing with this. No one else had an unsolved case. So I started doing some research and learned that there were 1,500 unsolved murders. At the time, 1,400 unsolved murders in Jacksonville alone. So not only was I not alone, but that there were a lot more people out there like me that were suffering and that were looking for answers. So I started contemplating the idea of starting an organization that focused more narrowly on those cold cases and not investigating them. That's not our role. I mean, if the professionals can't do it, then I surely wasn't going to be able to solve the case. But we felt like the cases were being forgotten. The faces were being forgotten. The names were being forgotten. The media had moved on to the newest violent crime of the day here in Jacksonville. So in January 2015, I left that other job, started Project Coldcase out of my house with my infant daughter, who was 3 months old at the time. And I conned my wife into believing that I could be a stay-at-home dad and start a foundation. Being a stay-at-home dad was way harder than anything that has to do with Project Coldcase, but it was a great time as well. But as the organization started to grow, we realized that she needed to go to daycare, and I needed a real office, and was probably going to need some help. So we kept growing and expanding. We started out literally just by putting victims' pictures on the website so that families knew their loved one wasn't forgotten. That was pretty much, no one else had ever done that. And it was pretty simple to do, even for me, who didn't have any web design experience. So that was how it started. I just wanted to be an ear for somebody that was struggling. I wanted to be able to show the victims' pictures and make sure that families knew that their case mattered, that their loved one mattered. But as more and more cases came in, we started seeing other ways that we could assist those families and other ways we could help. Social media is a powerful, powerful tool. If you don't like Project Coldcase on social media, check it out. There's lots of information on there. We share things all the time. We moved into these spotlights, and you see these are the last 3 spotlights that we have published. And all 3 of these are from UNF students from last semester. So this becomes a vital tool for us because, quite honestly, we're so busy in the office, and none of us went to school to be journalists. None of us really aspired to be that. We know our strengths, and our strengths are not in writing these stories. But we truly do believe how valuable they are. So now, there you go. That was Corey Santucci, and we go through and research and pull up newspaper clippings. If there's any videos, whatever family pictures we can get. If you could scroll down a little bit, so we can. So we get family photos. There's Matthew as a child, as he's growing up, and our goal, and eventually, if we get a video, if we get some television media or anything, we'll put that in there too. But our goal is to make this kind of the one-stop shop for the family, where they can share this link today, tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and we'll just keep adding to this page any pertinent information that we get along the way. So little things like that really are not that hard to do, become very, very important for the family because mostly no one else has ever done this for them before. So this one had a video, so we include that. We include, graphics that we create. Of course, we include who to contact if you have information, if there's any reward. And kind of the latest thing we've done is an impact and education point at the very bottom of the piece, so that research and impact. That particular victim was pregnant when she was killed, so we go into a little bit more of that and what some states consider that wasn't considered a second homicide. It was not considered a double homicide because of the age of the fetus. But in some states, that's different. And of course, depending on how far along she was in pregnancy, that could impact the charges if they're ever brought. But this is kind of, to us, one of the most important things we do is these spotlights. Because, when the murder happens, and I can speak to this from experience, my dad was murdered on a Saturday afternoon. Sunday, I was driving out to his house where his common law wife, they had been together for 24 years but had never been married, and I was going to see her. And as I was on my way out there, she called and said, "There's a reporter from the Times-Union in the driveway. You don't have to speak to him, but I just didn't want you to be surprised when you got there." So I said, okay, and I don't know why it made me mad, but I was frustrated that here was this guy sitting in the driveway trying to, take something so personal that we were still just trying to comprehend and get information on it. So when I got out of the car, I was kind of rude to him. Not real rude, but just, kind of like, I got more important things to take care of right now. And he said, no, that's fine. I completely understand. If you change your mind and want to talk, I'm just going to be out here on the car if that's okay. And so every now and then I'd catch a glimpse out the window and he'd be sitting on the back of the car, just sitting there by himself. And after about an hour and a half, I was like, gosh, this guy, man, he hasn't bothered us. He hasn't said anything. I should really go out there and talk to him, And so I went out there and I did my first interview with a reporter. And he really did care about my dad's case. He was very interested in the impact that it had on us. We ended up developing a friendship, and he wrote stories for the Times-Union over the years a few times. He's no longer there, but he would pick up stories. Anytime I would reach out to him, at least in the early days, he'd write a story. He'd do another story on it. Any anniversaries, those kinds of things. And so, as I said, we developed a relationship, and I started to realize what worked and what didn't with media and with journalists. We had a press conference for the reward, announcing an increase in the reward. We had a $13,000 reward at one point for information. And one of the television journalists, was standing in front, and she said, "How important is it to you that they find who killed your dad?" And it was an upsetting question because obviously, and my response was, well, how important would it be if it was your dad? But that was what she was trying to get, was that, response, that automatic, visceral, frustrated, me lashing out at her, because that was going to look good on the headlines. That was going to look good in the stories. And so sure enough, the headlines on every news station in Jacksonville were, "How important would it be if it's your dad?" So I learned a little bit in how to handle myself when being asked questions, how to respond to questions like that. There are people that we have really good relationships with local media, mostly television, but Action News Jax and First Coast News both have Coldcase series that they do that we help with, that we assist with. We get families to come down to our office and do interviews. We get cases. And we like to be that middle person because we know how to interact with the families, and then we trust these journalists as well. So we know that we can go to them and say, this is a touchy subject. Please don't mention the child that was involved. Please don't mention the other victim's name because they don't want that out there. They're still scared. We had that situation just recently. But as my own personal experiences grew with these interviews, we felt like we were creating these relationships, and to have the opportunity to come out here and speak to you, where one day you may find yourself, wherever this degree takes you, you may find yourself having to interview somebody that's lost a loved one to a murder. You may have to interview somebody that's a family of a cold case victim. So we wanted to be able to come out here and kind of tell you our story and then answer any questions. And then the ultimate goal, of course, is we brought with us cases. And, we'll pass those out, and you will have the opportunity to reach out to these families and to do one of these spotlights for our website. And kind of give you a little hint. Like our families, when they submit a case, it's not uncommon for them to follow up a week or two later and say, when's my spotlight going to be up? Well, if we're only doing one of these a week, that's only 52 a year. And we have now over 700 of them that have been submitted to us that are all wanting to know when their loved one's case is going to be spotlighted. So our goal kind of moving forward is we want to be able to do special spotlight series where maybe it's 5 children in 5 days, or 30 cases in 30 days, or at least 2 a week, so that we can start to kind of chip away at the backlog of cases that we're trying to spotlight. Eventually, we'd like to be able to do 50 cases from 50 states. These are not all Jacksonville cases, as you can see. Clint, do you remember the numbers? What do we did 8 Jacksonville, a couple other that are still in Florida, and then the rest from around the country, because we just can do more for families in Florida. We can, and specifically in Jacksonville, we can help them out. But then all of these families from New Mexico and Massachusetts reach out and they want to know why their loved one isn't as important. And that's the last thing we want any of our families to feel, is like their loved one isn't important. So
I just want to point out that when Brian says when he started this, nobody else was doing it, he doesn't mean just in Jacksonville. Nobody, they didn't have any templates or any anything to follow. There's nobody else doing anything like this in the country. There may be smaller projects or cold case highlights, but nobody is offering to write stories about these cold case victims. So they started this literally from scratch. The other thing I want to point out is that we tend as journalists to think, oh, we don't want to bring up things that are going to upset people. I don't want to talk to somebody about their dead relative because it might upset them. Somebody who has lost a person in that way, it is never, ever, ever off of their minds. I covered when I was on Cape Cod working, the first soldier from Cape Cod died. This was in the first Iraq War. And my editor said, you need to call that kid's parents and talk to them. And I was like, I don't want to do that. They just lost their son. And he said, well, you got to do it. It's your job. So I called this woman up and I said, I'm so sorry, and I apologize for calling you on this day, that I just wanted to know if there's anything that you wanted to say about your son. Boy, did she want to talk about her son. It was a gift for her to be able to talk about her son. It was a gift for the community to be able to hear about her son who had just died. That's kind of what you guys are doing. You are calling these people to say, tell me about your son. Tell me about your mom. Tell us about her so she is not forgotten. And the final thing I wanted to remember to say that Brian hasn't brought up is that even though we are not solving these cases are being solved.
Yeah. So we just crunched the numbers on it for an event we had last weekend or the weekend before, and we have 18 cases featured on our website that have been solved. Now, again, we're not investigating them, so we're not taking credit for solving the cases, but we know of cases where we every Friday, so if a case comes in this week, they submit it through our website. Frida, the interns, Clint, everybody gets their eyes on it. We get a picture of their loved one. We start inputting it in our system so we can track conversation back and forth with family. Confirm that it is a homicide, because we've had cases where they were justifiable or a suicide, and since we're not investigating them, we really can't assist in those kinds of cases where it might be a suspicious death. So once we vet the cases and we know that they're homicides, every Friday on social media we'll post all the pictures from that week. So every case that came in that we vetted and got a picture of, we'll have on Facebook, and there'll be somewhere between 3 and 9. We actually try to limit it some weeks, and we'll hold some back just because there's so many pictures that'll come in. And our goal, that's our first attempt to publicize their loved one's case. And then it's really up to them, because we can put it out there and we have our followers on social media that'll like it and they'll share it. But really when the family gets involved, and it's not uncommon because they're so happy somebody's doing this for them, they start sharing it. And then they start sharing it. And the next thing we know, we've got posts that are reaching, 55,000 people from some rural West Virginia town because after it was in the newspaper once, it was never talked about again. And these cases that were, 1982, you can find stuff on these cases from 2017, 2008, but this one here is 70 or 71. You Google those names, those victims' names, 1971, there's nothing there. It doesn't exist on the internet because those stories were not archived and put back online or put online for a first time once the internet became a thing. So you guys are all in this world where everything lives on the internet. And these poor families kept coming to us and saying, how come when we Google our loved one's name, nothing shows up? And we were like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. We coined this phrase.
These are clips.
These are actual physical clips from the newspaper that the family had held on to. And we kind of coined this term, internet silence, where it was just like they did not exist. And it was heartbreaking for these families because, think about it, you're a family of Mark Brotherton, and he doesn't exist on the internet. But what if you're somebody that has information on this case and you Google Mark Brotherton and you're willing and ready to come forward now and maybe give that one piece of information that could solve this case, and you Google his name because you don't know what an agency, and nothing comes up, So we take it very serious to archive and create these files for these families, where now if you Google Mark Brotherton, this comes up. We did a story with First Coast News on this case, so that story comes up. We have a number of families that come to us and say, my loved one was murdered 30 years ago and has gotten more publicity in the last 6 months than they ever received in 30 years. And we live in that kind of age of technology and age of information. So we have this opportunity to share these stories and to make sure that their information is out there. And we're looking to you to help us do that. And I think, from our experience in the past, this is I can tell, there's some of your faces, it's an intimidating project when you don't have any connection to it. But I can promise you, every single case that we hand out, we've already spoken to the family. We've asked them if they want to participate. Most of them are extremely excited to participate. The ones that said, well, let me think about it, we filled the slots before they got back to us and said, yeah, I want to do it. And we said, well, we'll have to wait till next time. So you're not going to be cold calling anybody that hasn't been completely brought up to speed on what you're doing, our connection to it, and where it's going to end up. We make sure they go, look at these. Hey, you've seen our spotlights on our website. Oh, yeah, we share them every week. That's what I kept hearing people tell Frida on the phone. Oh, yeah, I read them every Monday and share them on social media. So they know about them. You're not going to be cold calling them. As Professor Booker said, these families want to tell their loved one's story. You are not going to make their day worse or make them sad because you bring it up. They are already sad. They are already struggling with this loss and coping with not knowing who did it, why it was done, and there being zero accountability. So are they going to get emotional on the phone? Likely. This is still a very traumatic event in their lives. But we're going to give them an opportunity to tell not just about the murder, but about their loved one. Okay? So our loved ones outside of our control are kind of defined by their last moment in life. My dad is defined because he was a murder victim by other people. Not by me, but other people define him as a murder victim, as a cold case victim. But my dad was 56 years old when he was murdered. So he had 56 years of stories, 56 years of life experience to share and to talk about. And it's unfair to tell a story about my dad, and the only part you mention about him is the fact that he was murdered on October 10th, 2009. So what we do is we ask you to just ask about the family, ask about the victim, ask about their likes, dislikes, favorite holidays, favorite meals, any number of things that get them talking about happy memories. Now, don't get me wrong, we want to tell the story about how they died in case somebody can come forward with information. But we do not want this whole story to be about that victim's last moments on earth. We want that story to be what the community is missing out on now. What that person's dreams were, goals were, what they could have been, what they could have accomplished, what they wanted to accomplish, and what their family, the victim themselves, and the rest of the community lost out on because they were taken.
Some of these people you will hear them say, he took a wrong path, or he got addicted to drugs, or she was hanging out with the wrong people. And they want you to know the negative with the positive. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to start with, this premise, is that some of these victims may have made bad choices. It doesn't mean they were bad people. Excuse me. And so one of the points that we're doing here is saying, okay, not only is she not defined by her murder, she's not defined by the fact that she had the disease of addiction, okay? For example.
Absolutely.
She also can be defined by where she went to school, the fact that she played basketball in high school, or the fact that she loved making oatmeal raisin cookies. So those things are equally as important.
Yeah.
And I think that when Ryan says some of these guys are really excited to talk to you, they will be at times equally intimidated by you, because remember, you're the journalist here, and you are acting as journalists, real life journalists, and they are going to be a little bit intimidated by you as well. So hopefully you can reassure each other as you get into this.
We will be with you every step of that way. Frida in the office is the point of contact. Her information is provided with each of these little packets. We have business cards up here. She is going to stay on top of these cases. She did last time. She made sure that the students were calling the families and were following through with their commitments. We kind of kept track, and we knew which ones we were going to have problems with, and we would reach out and say, hey, look, this family is a little concerned about X, Y, or Z. On the flip side of that, we recognize that a number of these families last semester kind of panicked. They were super excited to do it, and then as soon as the students started calling and it was real, they had some hesitation. And so we've talked to the families about that. We're telling you about that. Don't be surprised if that first time you call, you get a voicemail. Don't be surprised if you have to call back, send an email, follow up a little bit. This seems like, to them it's a great opportunity, but sometimes following through with that, you need a little push, and we'll be helping out from our side. But just know that this, when it becomes real, all of a sudden they get a little bit, cautious. How's their loved one going to be portrayed? It kind of ties back into what we were talking about. A lot of victims do have addiction issues, mental health issues. We have families that come to us and say, well, the police didn't care because my daughter was a prostitute. The police don't care because my son sold drugs. The police don't care because my son bought drugs. Whatever that is, we don't judge a victim because none of them deserve to be murdered for what they were doing. And again, our role as advocates is to help their family through it. And certainly their family would wish that they would not have addiction issues or do things that were illegal, and that kind of thing. So while we want to be honest with these stories, if the family is willing to tell you that there was some addiction issues or drug issues or anything like that, that is perfectly okay to put in these stories. But you may find that they may gloss over that part of it, because they do have a fear that the public is going to read that and say that they deserved it, or they put themselves in that position and they're somehow to blame themselves for being murdered. And that's certainly not something we would ever want a family to feel. But if it's part of the story, we don't hide from it either. And we usually take on that role of telling the family, hey, drugs, prostitution, whatever it was, your loved one didn't deserve to be murdered. And so they take a little comfort in that. Frida, you're the point of contact. We did really well this last semester, kind of keeping track. What are some of the things I'm forgetting that we dealt with?
Maybe some of the things you might forget when you guys look at the packet and you read the information that's provided. I know it still catches me off guard. You're going to be speaking to older people. Sometimes we assume that people are like locked in time, but time is going on. So sometimes that always catches me off guard when the mother's older now and you can hear it in her voice. And you're like, man, somebody had to tell this story. So that's something. Another thing that you might be challenged with is the issues that the family has gone through since. Sometimes it can be very stressful, and it reflects in their life, what they share with you. So just be mindful of that.
You will talk to families that really haven't progressed in their grief and in their lives since the murder of their loved one. I can't tell you how many times we talk to a family, and my example I always go to is this woman called up really concerned. What's Project Coldcase? What are you going to do for me? What are you going to do for my loved one? And when I explained it to her, her immediate reaction was, I love this organization. I want to volunteer for this organization. I want to help however I can. As soon as my dad's case is solved, I'm going to come volunteer with you. And I was like, that's great. Tell me about your dad's case. August will be 20 years. I was like, okay. Is there anything new that has transpired? Is there, advancements in technology? Did somebody come forward? Is there a reason to believe that your dad's case is close to being solved? No. That's where she was, and she was convinced still 20 years later that any day now her dad's case was going to get solved. And once it was, then she was going to come help us. That was probably 4 years ago. That case still is unsolved. She has tried everything under the sun to try to get as much publicity as possible for the case. Contributed to books, harassed television stations, flooded news feeds on social media. And we think we know what happened in her dad's case. Talking to the detectives, talking to her dad. Here's another example of some of the things you kind of uncover. Her dad was a closeted homosexual. He was retired military, gone back to work on a base in South Carolina, had children, had a wife, ended up divorced, lived a secret lifestyle because he was so worried about what other people would think or feel about him. And his closeted lifestyle led him down to a boat ramp in Columbia, South Carolina, where he and another gentleman went off into the woods, and then he ended up stabbed to death. Because he had been closeted and didn't share his lifestyle with anybody in his family, it was hard to start to identify suspects because he had this whole other life that no one knew about. When police were going to family and friends, they had no idea. And it was the police investigation that revealed this lifestyle. And still to this day, the daughter has a really hard time accepting what is the truth about her dad. That he was stuck in a place where he was so scared to be who he was that he hid it from everybody he knew. And when he ended up dead, none of those people were able to assist in the investigation, which hurts her even more because she feels like she could do more if she knew who did it. There was a guy that was also a closeted homosexual that would he would get aggressive. He would go meet men. They would go out to the boat ramp or out wherever, and after they had their encounter, he would get enraged and he would attack the man that he had just been with. They think that's what happened in this case, but a few years later, when he did that, the person that he attacked actually was able to get the knife from him and stab the attacker to death. And so they have, because again, there was no connection between this victim and the suspect, they've not been able to clear that case, but they believe 100% that that's the same guy and he was going around doing this to other people, but they've never been able to prove it. So some of the things you'll hear is that they know who did it. People don't realize how many cases out there that are unsolved and the police know exactly who did it. They just don't have enough evidence to prosecute. So
We will protect you from saying things you shouldn't. So
Yeah.
They will tell you, this is who did it. You know, Joe Jones did it, and you should put that in there. And you just say, okay, and you know, let them talk. We won't let you do that. We're not going to do anything that's going to put you in harm's way.
No, yeah.
But you know, think about what Ryan is saying. So here's this one murderer who it seems has been murdered himself. If there are how many cases in Jacksonville, cold cases right now?
1,500.
1,500. So let's say let's say a third of those people have either died or maybe they went to jail for something else, or even half of them. That still means there are hundreds of murderers walking around in Northeast Florida. I mean, chances are we have walked past people who have killed other people. That's one of the reasons, I suspect, that it's so difficult for people to move past, because they see bad in everybody they see.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to talk a little more about that, but also the story that you told, which was so touching, about finally listening to your dad's.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I told you, my dad spent the last few minutes of his life on the phone with a 911 operator. And I had never listened to that recording. I'd never wanted to listen to that recording. I didn't want the last time I heard my dad's voice to be him dying. I knew that the tape was 7 minutes long. I knew that when police and rescue arrived on the scene that my dad was unconscious. So I knew that he basically, died on that tape. So I mentioned to a couple people, like, is there anything on that tape that I would want to hear? The lead detective on the case, the sergeant, the state attorney, a number of people I said, that had listened to it. And they had all told me, you really don't want to listen to this tape. And I said, well, is there anything on there you think I would want to know? Because, of course, I'm thinking, did my dad say anything about me? Did he say, tell Ryan this? Did he say, and they were always evasive. Like, you can listen to it if you want to, but I don't recommend it. And I was like, that's not answering my question. Like, if you would just answer this question, my curiosity would be satisfied. So this past October was the 10th anniversary of his murder. And it was particularly hard on me. The lead investigator on my dad's case retired in October. So he had always been very good to me. He'd always been honest with me, other than what's on the tape. But he never hid anything from me. And I always felt like I had an ally in the sheriff's office, that if I ever needed anything answered about my dad's case, I could call him, I could meet him for lunch. He was retiring. The entire chain of command at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was changing, and I no longer had anybody. These people that I'd spent 10 years developing relationships with were all retiring or transferring out of homicide, and it was just a particularly difficult time. But I thought, I'm going to do a public records request, and I'm going to ask for my dad's entire case file. And they provided it. They charged me $250, $220, something like that. And when I got it, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, the tape. Am I going to listen to the tape? Am I going to listen to the 911 recording? And I went through the case file, and it wasn't in there. So I wrote him back, and I said, thank you for the case file. There's something missing. I know there's a 911 call, and there's a recording. And I know this because the lead detective has told me, the sergeant has told me, the chief has told me, the assistant state attorney has told me, the state attorney has told me. I know this tape exists, this recording exists. And so they responded, we gave you everything that was in the file. And so I again reiterated, the people that had listened to the tape prior. And so they said, well, it'll take us a couple days. Let us look into it. They claimed that the recording had been submitted to the evidence locker and wasn't in the case file, but they had located it and they provided it to me. So now I have this giant dilemma of whether to listen to it or not. And I have recognized over the years that I'm starting to forget what my dad's voice sounded like. So I thought, I just want to hear him one more time. And I thought, I'll play the tape and they'll say, 911, what's your emergency? And he'll say, my name's Cliff Backman and I've just been shot. And it'll sound like him, and I'll stop the recording and I will kind of remember his voice, and then it will be years before it fades again. And I hit play and they said, 911, what's your emergency? And he says, I need help. I've just been shot. And it doesn't sound like my dad. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll listen a little bit more. And he's in shock. He's been shot. And so I'm listening to his voice, and he's not saying a lot. They're asking a lot of questions. He's having a hard time responding because he's dying. And it takes a while before, like, just one little inflection in one of his responses sounds like him. But then I'm 3/4 of the way through this recording, and so I'm like, well, I've made it through, this far. I'll just keep listening. And what I didn't realize, and what people were trying to protect me from, was the end of the recording. The last things that he says is him repeating, please help me. And he's begging for someone to come help. And the last words he says are, someone please help me. And then the recording goes on for a little while longer with the 911 police dispatcher and the rescue dispatcher, and they're going, sir, can you hear us? Sir, do you hear anybody? Are police there? Sir, respond to us. Stay with us. Stay with us. And about that time, you hear sirens, and you hear somebody run up and say, hey, buddy, are you okay? Hey, buddy. And that's it. That's where the tape ends. So it was a lot like those nights after I found out my dad had been murdered, like the weight of the world on my chest, reliving that, hearing what he went through, hearing him begging for help. I mean, I challenge you to just hit your timer for 7 minutes and just sit there and watch that clock and imagine that you're shot and you're waiting for somebody to come help you. It was again a traumatic experience for me to listen to it. I'm not sure yet if I regret listening to it or not. I really was forgetting what my dad sounded like, and that really, really is upsetting to me. So I immediately took the recording and I took it to an attorney that had somebody that transcribes court documents, and asked if they would transcribe it, so I had it in writing if I ever needed to reference it again, but that way I don't have to listen to it again. So a lot of these families, I haven't come across another case where somebody has a 911 tape and they've listened to it, but we've talked to families that have been on the scene, come up to the scene, found out through other means besides the police notification. Social media can be a horrible thing when people find out their loved one's been murdered that way. But these moments are intense and they're traumatic for these families. And I don't mind telling my story. I've done it so many times that I'm kind of used to it. That's a new portion of my story. I mean, I just told that for the first time a couple Saturdays ago publicly. I'm still processing what that was for me. These families have things like that are triggers, that are parts of their story that they may not be comfortable telling because it's really upsetting to them. So we want to make sure that they're comfortable talking. If they need to take a break, please allow them that opportunity to call you back or to just get a drink, take a break. Those things are important for them, as well as this is going to be heavy for you too. And I think one of the things we're going to do this semester that we haven't done in the past is hopefully come back on the due date, whenever this project finishes, and allow you to tell us your experiences and how we can make it better. What was particularly hard, what was particularly rewarding. Some of those some of the things that may help us move forward with the next class, the next semester, and make sure that they get the best experience possible. I wanted to show you kind of what your packets are going to look like. Okay, so each packet will have a picture of the victim on the front with the date of death and the location. This was 2016 in New Orleans. The second page is an informational page for you that has some of what we've talked about up here today. It'll give you some of the do's and don'ts that you can refer to when you're interviewing the families. It gives you contact information for our office that you can reach out to. And then what you'll get is the case submission form that we get through our website, which shows victim name, survivor's name, demographics, race, gender, age, location, cause of death, investigating agency, and then if any of their contact information has been updated, you'll see that down below, because sometimes people move, and sometimes they get new phone numbers. But then also, if there's any news articles that we've come across that we have in our system, you'll see those in there too. And then on the very back page is a timesheet, which it's really simple, but it's really important for our grant. If you can just put the date of whatever days you work on it and how many hours, and you can just round up every half hour. Like we don't need 15-minute increments or 5-minute increments. But if you do something on it, mark half an hour on there, an hour and a half, or whatever it is, and then at the end of the class, we'll collect those, and that assists us with our grant, which is really how we're funded, almost solely. We have 2 grants that pay all of our overhead, salaries, rent, those kinds of things, and then when we have fundraisers, right now that money is just kind of going into an account to make sure that if any of those grants stop or slow down, that we can continue forward, but also for specific projects that we have. Like sometimes we help law enforcement fund private lab testing or genetic genealogy and stuff like that, and so we have those funds available to do that. Does anybody have any questions? I should have told you can ask them as we go, but
I'm going to pass out the cases in a few minutes, but I would like you to ask questions about the process. Keeping in mind that I'm not just going to throw you out there. On Wednesday, what we'll do is talk about how to call these folks, exactly what to say. We're going to do practice interviews in class, so when you start the process, you're going to be fully prepared. But Ryan's right. Some of you all are going to be very emotional about this process, and that's okay. Journalists have feelings, and writers have feelings, and you are going to want to identify with these people in order to do a story that does their loved ones justice. So
I have a few experiences where the person that interviewed me would start to get teary-eyed, their eyes would start to water, and I always felt like that meant they were paying attention and they really cared, and that they were vested in telling my dad's story. So for me, that was not a sign of weakness or negative in any way. It was kind of let me know that, like, wow, they are paying attention. This isn't just another story. It's not just another victim. They're listening, and they're affected.
I think also, just because you are affected or there is some empathy, please don't assume you know how the family feels. Please don't try to force that connection, because the worst feeling is having someone say, "Who did you lose?" And you're like trying to force that connection. Please use the victim's name as often as you can. They love to hear it. They want people to say it, so please don't tiptoe around, well, what happened? Please use the victim's name. Oftentimes the family will still speak in present tense, even if it's been 20, 30 years. They haven't made that transition mentally. But please use those names. And please do not rush the process. I don't text or email solely through the whole project. If you're trying to schedule, that's fine. But please connect to the family.
this is actually not allowed. I mean, you can text or email to make arrangements to meet.
Good.
But these interviews must be done either in person, on the phone, or FaceTiming or Skyping. Preferably something where you can see the person. The FaceTime and Skyping thing, obviously, if somebody's living in New Orleans or Virginia Beach, you're not, we have no budget to send you up there. But I definitely want you to be able to see their faces. John?
And also be good at redirecting. Sometimes the family will get caught in the speculation, and they're gonna miss the actual opportunity to tell you for a fact who the loved one was. Don't hype them up with, oh, I know who did it, he lives like, you can listen, but kind of redirect them toward the purpose of the interview.
And I will teach, that's a great point, and I will teach you how to do that. And as well, Frida and Ryan are amazing. They get back to us immediately. If you're having a problem reaching your person, don't wait a week to tell me, oh, I sent a text last week. Right away, we need to know whether this is working, because if it's not working, maybe it's a bad time for the person, and I need to get you a new family. Frida and Ryan are great at getting right back to us.
Yeah, we've actually got a couple extra cases, you know what I mean? And we've kind of, now that this is a much smoother running program and project, you know, we feel comfortable letting other families know, hey, look, we've got you on the list. You know what I mean? Like, we've got some other people that volunteered to do these spotlights as well. So we went ahead and we asked a few extra people because we have learned in the past that there may be some family that maybe something happens between when we talk to them and when you call them. You know, we had one that had lost another loved one last semester, like to murder. And so it was like, you know, sometimes it's just too much for them, and they think that it's going to be okay and easy, and then it's not. So we will have extra cases so that if something like that happens, but just keep in mind that doesn't mean like you reach out to them once and they haven't called you back in 30 minutes. You need a new case. Like this takes. They need to build some kind of rapport and trust with you. You know, so they need to hear your voice or see you via Skype and know that you're vested in this with them.
And we've just spoken to all of them.
Yeah.
So please be comfortable knowing that you're not just reaching out. Everyone we've spoken to several times with email, they are expecting you to call them.
Yeah, every single one of these people were spoken to like Thursday and Friday. You know what I mean? So this is not something that we called them in September and told them it was coming. I mean, every single one of these was spoken to last week. So, and I know there was a question in the back. Sir, did you?
Alondra, you had a question?
So what I wanted to probe on is that basically you said they're prepped as far as they know that we're going to be inquiring in regards to this.
Yeah.
Would audio recordings, would that be, is that sometimes a possibility as well?
Well, that's something we're going to talk about. Audio recording
That's right.
is sometimes helpful, but sometimes it intimidates people. So you may ask them if it's okay for you to record them, and they may say, all right, but then you find that they're not talking freely.
That's why I wanted to make sure, because that's what specifically I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Alondra?
I know there's different laws in different states. Is that going to be any hindrance to us as we communicate? Or is it strictly just communicating with relatives and
Laws regarding what?
just
Public
communicating
information or stuff like that.
information,
Yeah.
resources?
So depending on how much time you have and how quickly you get started, you could potentially do a records request through the law enforcement agency for more information. Typically with a cold case, they're not going to provide a lot, or they're going to charge you for everything. And we've talked about the budget. So you may be getting all of your information from the families, but we encourage you to ask the family member for other family members to speak to. But you know, it's possible that you could get records. But if it's a Jacksonville case and you reach out, it's likely that it's going to take them 3 weeks to get back to you. You know, and the project may be over by then. You know,
But there are other ways that, I mean, you have to think outside the box to get information. If it's a Jackson, no matter where it is, you're always going to have the address of where the crime occurred. There's Google Earth, there's Zillow. You can zero in on where it happened, you can describe it. You can see the person's childhood home if you have an address, and you can describe that. There are lots of ways that you can create color and description for these stories. And we'll talk about
and some of them will have had some media, particularly the ones in the last 10 or 15 years. You could easily find something if you Google their name. And families may have the newspaper clippings, you know what I mean? And you can ask them to text you a picture of it, scan it and email it to you. anything like that that would help you and us, because we're going to end up asking for all that stuff as well. But yeah, I mean, there's potential there, but you know, we use newspapers.com to pull up old stories, but the Times-Union doesn't archive with newspapers.com, so it's always tough to find Jacksonville stuff.
I'm gonna pass these out so I can make sure and get everybody's name down, before they leave.
Like I said, there's a few extras.
Okay.